I'm going to try and explain what's probably one of the most significant breakthroughs you can come to on the spiritual path. And I have talked about it before from different perspectives, but I really think it's important enough that we need to talk about it in a separate video. And it's the role of spiritual teachers and how we use spiritual teachers and their teachings. So, just to get started, because it's a wide-ranging topic, but just to get started, I've said before I've been on a spiritual path for 48 years. I've observed myself, the struggles I've had with spiritual growth. I've observed many other people and how they have struggled with spiritual growth. I've studied the topic. I've read many books about it. You know, what is the essence of spiritual growth? Why is it that some people make progress and others don't? Why is it that some people actually use the spiritual teaching to get themselves into a blind alley where they might think they're very advanced spiritual students, but they're really not making any progress. They're not transcending themselves, and they can basically stay at the same level for decades while being convinced that, you know, in the end, they're going to make it to whatever their goal is. And so, why is that? And I've talked before about there's the inner path and there's the outer path. And on the outer path, you think you do outer things and rituals, and then you're automatically going to make it in the end. On the inner path, you realize you have to look at your psychology and result psychology. But what hit me was that I have known people on the spiritual path where I would say they haven't locked into what the spiritual path really is about. And I know you can always say when you step back and you say, oh, well, have you? And I can look back at myself and I can say, well, when I first found the spiritual path when I was 18, I read Yogananda's book, Autobiography of Yogi, and that book gave me a certain understanding of what the spiritual path is about. And that's, 48 years ago. And it's not that that understanding that I had back then was wrong, but by no means was it the full picture. And so then I can look back and say, then some years later, in the early 1980s, I found the Ascended Master teachings in the form of the Summit Lighthouse teachings. And after having studied them for a few years and having gone to these levels of what they call Summit University, and I had moved to the United States, and I had practiced, given all these degrees, I again thought I had a good understanding what the spiritual path was about. And it wasn't that it was necessarily wrong, but it certainly wasn't the full picture. And so then you can say again, when I started working directly with the Ascended Masters in 2002, they gave me a deeper understanding of what this path was about. And so you can look at 2005, 6, that time frame. I again thought I had a good understanding, much higher understanding than I had before of the spiritual path. And it wasn't that it was wrong, but it was not the full picture, and you get the drift. And you can continue that to the present day. And so, obviously, I'm very well aware that today I'm at a certain level of consciousness among the 144 levels of consciousness. I have a certain level understanding of the spiritual path based on what I can see from this level. And of course, I recognize that there are levels beyond mine. And I also recognize what the Master said. They have so many more spiritual teachings to give us that it's like what they have given so far, which is actually quite a lot, is like a spoonful compared to the ocean. So, so I realized that, there's more to know. And so therefore you could say, well, I understood the spiritual path. But one way to approach this would be to say, have I actually gotten results from being on the spiritual path? And the answer is absolutely. Have I met many other people who have gotten results? And the answer is absolutely. I know many people who have gotten results. But I have also met some people who have done all the outer things right, studied spiritual teaching, practiced spiritual techniques, and been in a spiritual movement, and this and that. And they have gained a good intellectual understanding of what the spiritual path is about, but they haven't really had the results. They haven't really made the progress. And so now, what does it mean to have gained results? Well, you can define it in many ways, but one way is to say you are approaching a state of mind where you're no longer reacting. You don't have all these reactionary patterns. And as a result of that, your life is not a struggle. You're not in conflict with other people. You don't feel frustrated with the state of the world. You're increasing your sense of peace of mind. I mean, if you really want to say what would be a very clear result of spiritual growth, you attain peace of mind. Freedom in your mind, freedom to be who you are. You can be who yourself. You can, instead of putting on a facade and thinking you should be this way, you can be yourself. And you can be at peace about it. So based on this, as I said, I've seen a certain number of people who don't get that result, even though they've been on the path for many years and they've seemingly done all the other things right. So why is it that some people don't get that result, the transformation of consciousness? Because even when I look back to Unconditional's book that I read 48 years ago, I got that the point of the spiritual path is the transformation of consciousness, to reach a higher state of consciousness. And I have achieved that. I'm not saying it's the ultimate state of consciousness, but compared to where I was at 18, it's much higher than that. And again, I've seen many other people also have attained a significantly higher state of consciousness as a result of walking the spiritual path. So why is it that some people don't get that result? Well, if you think about it, what I'm talking about here is your state of mind. And that's what is going on inside of yourself. So why aren't you at peace? It's because there's something in your psychology that takes away your inner peace. How are you going to get peace? You have to look at what it is in your psychology and resolve it. I mean, it's really simple. There's no big secret here. I used to, for many years, when I was younger, I used to think that one day I would have this glorious awakening, epiphany, and I would see this secret that I'm not seeing right now. And it was just a matter of finding the right spiritual teaching, the right book, or hearing the right ascended master dictation, or this or that. And I've seen many spiritual people go into this. We think it's the key is to figure out or get some knowledge or understanding that we don't have right now. And there's an ultimate understanding, and then we're there. And that's just an illusion, because it is not about our knowing something. It doesn't do you any good to have knowledge if you don't apply it. And what do I mean with applying it? If you don't apply it to yourself. So here's where this comes into play. So the key to changing your state of mind is to see what's going on in your mind, in your subconscious mind especially. And a spiritual teaching can be a help in seeing what is going on in your state of mind. And when you see it, the spiritual teaching can also help you resolve it, but only if you apply it. And that's what I'm trying to get at. The people who don't get the results, why is that? It's not because they don't have the teaching, but they're not applying it to themselves. So let's take a typical example. I have 3 playlists about ego. Ego illusions, ego games, ego dramas. These are based on some books that the Ascended Master Jesus gave to me, dictated to me a number of years ago. I can't even remember when it started, but it was 2000, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 maybe. And so those books have been out there for quite some time. And they talk in very great depth about the ego, the different aspects of the ego. And I know people who have read those books, some even several times, but I haven't, and they understand there's a certain aspect of the ego. And they are capable of seeing how that aspect of the ego works in other people. But I haven't seen it in themselves. They haven't seen that they have it. And that in their minds, that aspect of the ego is just a little bit different than what it is in other people or the way it's described in the book. So it's like these people, they understand it from a general viewpoint. They can see it in other people, but they haven't turned around, looked in the mirror, and seen it in themselves and seen, oh, I have this tendency. It's just a little bit different form in my mind. And that's why they haven't resolved it, and that's why they haven't gotten the results, because that element of ego still pulls them away from that inner peace. So here's where this has a bearing on spiritual teachers. What is a spiritual teacher? Well, you can say, here's a physical person who sets himself or herself up as a guru, attracts followers, so that person is a spiritual teacher. Or they start a YouTube channel and give teachings on YouTube. So this is a spiritual teacher, yes. But it's an outer teacher who's giving an outer teaching. Now, some of these spiritual teachers may actually work with people individually. And so they may be able to work with an individual person and talk to that person and say, but can't you see how this general teaching applies to you individually? I'm not saying all spiritual teachers do that, but some do. And so this can be valuable. But that's because these teachers, the teachers that do this, they are not just general teachers, they are also specific individual teachers. They are working with people individually. And so you could say the people who haven't gotten the results because they have a teaching but they haven't applied it to themselves, they could benefit from working with one of these teachers. And I believe that's true. If you can find a good teacher that can work with you individually, you can certainly benefit from that. But if you look at it from a practical perspective, millions of people are awakening to the spiritual side of life and the spiritual path in these years. Could they all find a teacher who could work with them individually? Because this obviously takes time and attention, and a person in embodiment only has a limited amount of each. So the more practical situation from a larger view is that people start to work with the Ascended Masters. And what I mean with that is, and this has incidentally always been my view and my understanding of this, is that I'm a messenger for the Ascended Masters. I have brought forth a large amount of teachings that are out there in books and on the websites. I work somewhat with people on an individual level, at least at conferences where I get to talk to people. But my role is to bring forth these teachings that are general, that are universal, so they apply to more than one person. They're not, I don't take dictations for one specific person. The Masters do not use me that way. I actually don't believe they do with anybody. But so what I'm trying to say is that even though the Ascended Masters are spiritual teachers, the teachings they are giving through me or through the Summit Lighthouse or other dispensations, they're general, not individual. But the Ascended Masters are not in a physical body. They are not in time and space. And so they are perfectly capable of working with millions of people individually. They're perfectly capable of doing this. And they're willing to do it. I mean, I look back at my time, first heard about Ascended Masters in the early 1980s, and I felt from the beginning I had some inner contact with the Masters, but it wasn't very clear, and it took me a number of years before I really started getting it, but it gradually increased. And what that means is that if I read a general book, let's say it's a general book about psychology, for example, I have developed a habit of asking the Masters to show me how what I'm reading applies to my personal psychology. And this means that I can then get a general knowledge from the book, but I can get a personalized impulse, idea, directly from the Masters intuitively. And this is what I would like to see happen to all who are following the teachings given through me. In other words, I don't want to be like I have a monopoly on the Masters, or I am the key to you having contact with the Ascended Masters. I do not want to in any way put myself in that position. Because my vision is that people will use the teachings to develop that personal relationship with the Masters, so that you can read a general teaching given by the Masters in a dictation or book, and then you ask the Masters and you get intuitively a personalized instruction from the Masters that shows you how that general teaching applies to you personally. So you're reading a general teaching about the ego, and you can see, oh, this is how it applies to me individually. This is what my subconscious self believes about this particular aspect or this way to react to life or whatever it may be. And what I'm trying to say with this whole thing is that over the years I've observed that some people, they don't make it over that hump where they get that personalized instruction. In fact, many people that find the Ascended Master teachings and follow them seemingly faithfully for years, they don't quite make it over that hump. And so what I really wanted to discuss here was why not? And again, it's subtle, wide-ranging topic. There's more than one reason. There's probably, again, each person probably has their own individual reason, but let's at least try and discuss it. And I think we need to start by recognizing what I've said before, what the Masters have taught. There are 144 possible levels of consciousness on Earth. There's the dividing line at the 48th level. At the 48th level, you see yourself, you have an intuitive sense you're connected to something outside your own mind. When you go below the 48th level, you go into separation, you use the duality consciousness to define a worldview inside your own mind, or you adopt it from an outer teaching. And then you think this is infallible, and now you want to defend that worldview instead of transcending it. When you are connected, you are constantly seeking to transcend yourself in your worldview. Now, what happens? See, when you still see yourself as connected, you have at least some connection to a higher self and to the Ascended Masters. Intuitive connection. May not be so clear. It may be that you can get an intuitive impulse, as happens to all of us, and your outer analytical mind starts interpreting and overriding it. That may be, but you still have some connection. When you go into separation, you have no connection. That means you cannot directly contact the Ascended Masters within your own mind. So how can the Masters help you when you've gone below the 48th level? Well, I can help you only by giving you an outer teaching that you can read or listen to. So in other words, they give you a teaching that's clearly coming from outside yourself. Clearly. And you see it as coming outside yourself. And you can see people who are at this level of consciousness, they can still find an Ascended Master teaching, they can still study it, they can still acquire a very good intellectual understanding of the teaching. But they cannot get a personalized, intuitive instruction from within for how to apply the teachings to themselves. This doesn't mean they can't apply it, but it happens only when they see something internally and understand something internally. And so, in other words, we can have an outer teaching given by the Ascended Masters. We can have an inner teaching, a personalized instruction coming to each person. When you're below the 48th level, you only have the outer teaching. You can't really get the personalized instruction. You might get it from other people. You could even get it from a spiritual teacher and embodiment, but not from your Ascended Masters. So then you go above the 48th level, and I think most people that find Ascended Master teachings are very close to the 48th level can fairly quickly go beyond it. So now you have a long period where you climb from the 48th level to the 96th level. And you do this because you use an outer teaching, you give the decrees and invocations and so forth, and you are receiving some intuitive insights from within, from your higher self, from your ascended teachers, whatever master you are working with, and it may change over time as you, of course, grow up towards the 96th level. So you are receiving some intuitive insight, and for most people, you will increase your intuitive connection. It will get better and better, clearer and clearer. But then when you come close to the 96th level or come to the 96th level, you need to make another shift. And I've talked about this shift before in several videos. And what I want to clarify here is one aspect of this shift. It's not the totality of the shift, but one very important aspect of it. What is it that you really do when you go into separation and use the duality consciousness? You are defining how you think the world should work, or you are taking an outer teaching and saying this explains how the world should work. So really what you have in your own mind, you have this belief, even if you're not conscious of it, that your mind is capable of defining how the world should work and how the world does work. And you can have some challenges to this belief when you're below the 48th level, because you can have other people who seem to be smarter than you, or you can come across a teaching that you recognize it gives you some understanding of the world that you don't have, that you couldn't come up with on your own. But still, you have this belief that your mind is still very sophisticated. And it is able to, if not necessarily define how the world works, then at least recognize the teaching that defines it. And therefore, you're superior. Or you are at least advanced. You are a mature student. You know something. And I've also explained in several videos about non-duality and about ego that when you go into separation, you have a certain sense of loss because you lost that connection. And you're seeking to compensate. Your ego is created to compensate for that loss by making you feel like, oh, you're okay. At least okay. And maybe even sophisticated, maybe even really smart, maybe even really advanced. And you can go all the way to the lowest level where the fallen beings have taken this glorification of the separate self to the extreme. So the separate self feels threatened, and it seeks to avoid that sense of being threatened or suppress it by building this idea that it's very sophisticated because it knows certain things. So here you go above the 48th level. Now you begin to have that intuitive sense, but it's really you're really pulled in two different directions from the 48th to the 96th level because you have some intuitive insights, but you also have the outer mind that wants to maintain this idea that you are advanced, or maybe you even really know something. And I saw it in myself. I saw it actually in TM already, where many of these people, especially those who had taken these teacher training courses and later these governor courses, they felt very advanced. They felt that they really reached some kind of high level of spiritual development. And then in the Summit Lighthouse, it was said, even by the Ascended Masters in dictations, that you have the highest spiritual teaching on the planet. And the way most people interpreted that, this guy included, was that the fact that I found this teaching must mean that I'm one of the most sophisticated spiritual students on the planet. Otherwise, I couldn't recognize the teaching. And let's not even discuss whether this is true or not. Let's instead ask a different question. Is this attitude helpful on the spiritual path? And is it helpful for passing the initiation on the 96th level? And the answer to both questions is clear no. It's not helpful. What does it do for you? How does it help you grow? It only helps your ego feel secure. So I understand that, as I've said before, many of us, we grew up in a non-spiritual society, an anti-spiritual society. We were often put down for having questions and having a spiritual longing. And so we first find the spiritual path and the spiritual teaching. We have a need to sort of compensate for that and feel, oh yeah, now we're okay. Now we belong to this organization where there are all these other people that are spiritual and we are really, we are advanced. So I'm saying this is okay, this is a fine phase, but it doesn't help you pass the initiation at the 96th level. And so what did I say? I said, ideally, when you go above the 48th level, you should expand your sense of connection to the Ascended Masters so that when you read a general teaching, you can get an impulse, an idea from the Masters that shows you how this applies to you. You're reading a teaching about the ego that has the epic mindset, and you can get from the Masters how you have an epic mindset and might even have applied it to Ascended Master teachings or used the teachings to validate the epic mindset. And this then helps you grow faster. But your ego is going to work against this. And what is working against it is this idea of the ego that you are not only advanced, but that there's a certain worldview, a certain view of yourself that the ego has created, and this is infallible. You don't need to question this. You may need to question other things, but you don't need to question this. And I can see it in myself. For many, many years on the path, I had this push and pull. I can clearly see how, for example, I would get an intuitive prompting. And then, almost as soon as it had come into my mind, my outer mind would start interpreting it. Sometimes it would explain it away, why it doesn't really apply to me. I did that many, many times. So what I'm trying to say is I had a long period after I found the Ascended Master teachings, and even before, because I think I was probably, like many spiritual people, I was probably above the 48th level when I was born. So I had a long period in my life where I had intuitive insights, but it was like I had certain areas in my consciousness where I didn't want to get any intuitive insights, or I didn't want to apply them. It was kind of like my ego had defined certain safe zones for itself. Here I'm safe. You can question all these other things out there. Don't question this. And so what the Masters have explained is, when we start at the 48th level and go up towards the 96th, our main task at that point is to raise ourselves beyond the pull of the collective consciousness, because the collective consciousness pulls us away from being spiritual, away from walking the path, away from putting on Christhood. The collective consciousness just wants us to be like everybody else and conform and submit. So we have to pull ourselves above that, and in order to do that, we have to create a spiritual self that's strong enough to withstand that. So in a sense, you could say that as part of building this spiritual self, it's pretty much inevitable probably, that we use the ego's sense that it's right, that it's superior, and we transfer that to the spiritual path. So now we're using the spiritual teaching and the spiritual path, and I've given all of these decrees, I've meditated for so many years and this and that to build this sense that we're special. But the inevitable consequence of this is, again, we are actually maintaining this view that there are certain things we know that we don't need to question. So you can read an outer teaching about ego, but as I said, your ego has to find these safe zones. No, here you don't have any ego. You don't need to look at this. You don't need to question this because you have no ego at that level. Maybe you have some aspects of ego out there, but there's a core there where you don't have any ego. And I have seen people that I knew over a long period of time, and that were Ascended Master students, and that were from the outer perspective doing everything right. But when I got to know them a little better, I could see that they had this. Certain things in their core of their psychology that they hadn't even started to question. And you can always say, of course, didn't I have the same myself? And I actually did for many years. And who knows whether there are things I still haven't seen, because the whole nature of the game is what you haven't seen, you don't know. You don't know that you don't know it. It's Donald Rumsfeld again during the Iraq War who said that there are known unknowns, but there are also unknown unknowns. So, but what I'm trying to say though is that there came a point for me where I understood this. I understood that the ego wants to create these safe zones where there's things you don't question. And I started to see that for years and years and years, I have been asking the masters all the time, help me see this, help me see this, help me see this. But subconsciously, there were certain things I didn't want to see, I didn't want to look at. And I came to see that dynamic, and it took me some years to process it. But at least there came a point where I acknowledged that when I had asked the masters for help, it was selective. In other words, there were certain areas where I wanted help, and there were certain other areas where I didn't want help. It wasn't that I consciously saw this, but I came to see it. I came to see that what some of those areas were, at least. And I came to a point where I realized that I had been sort of pulling the masters in and pushing them away at the same time. And I realized that this didn't make any sense, and I didn't want to do this anymore. And I at least came to the point where I in my mind, I actually recognized in my mind this push and pull. I recognized this schizophrenic view of wanting the Ascended Master's help and not wanting it in certain areas. It was like I was willing to grow, but I was afraid that what if there's a really bad aspect of ego that I have that would make the masters not love me, or that would make me condemn myself? Wouldn't it be better that I didn't see it? And of course it wouldn't, but I'm just saying, I came to the point where I recognized this inconsistency, in contradiction in my approach to the masters. And I came to the point where I processed this, and I came to a point where I could say, with peace of mind, I could ask the masters, show me anything, and I didn't have any fear about what they would reveal. So in other words, there was a period where I was saying to the masters, help me see this, but I was afraid of what I might see. And I came to a point where I overcame that fear, and where I could say to the masters, just show me, because I was willing to see whatever there was. And I also came to a point where I could say to the masters, show me what I can't see and what I can't even ask about. I can't even formulate a question. Just show me. And that, of course, did two things for me. First of all, it gave me peace of mind, because now I was not afraid of what I was going to see down there in the subconscious mind, you know. And that's a good place to be, instead of this constant fear of what might be real. It's like, I think back to the Summit Lighthouse, which was really honestly a fear-based organization in so many ways. And they didn't talk so much about ego, they talked about the dweller on the threshold. And the idea was that before you took a step up to a higher level of the spiritual path, there was this dweller that was lying on the threshold and that was going to oppose you going to the next level, passing your test, passing your initiation. And it could even seek to devour you. And they had this image that your Christ self was like St. George slaying the dragon of the dweller. So the dweller was just like a dragon. And many people really had a fear of what this dweller was, and including myself for a time. And so there was this fear, and I think many spiritual people have this. There's a fear of what is hiding down there in the shadows. What is it? There's the second of the original Star Wars movies where Luke Skywalker is on this planet, that's a jungle planet, where he's being trained by Yoda. And it comes to a point where there's a cave that opens up, and he has to go down there. And he says to Yoda, "What's down there?" And Yoda says, "Only what you take with you." And so I think a lot of people have that sense of, oh my God, what is hiding down there? And I think this is an important aspect of why people can't take the general teaching and apply it to themselves. So as I'm saying, I went through a conscious process of dealing with this, processing this, and coming to a point where I was willing to have the Master show me whatever is there. And so does that mean I think you could do the same? Well, why not? I mean, what is the motto of the Ascended Masters? What one has done, all can do. But when we think about this, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it was easy for me. It took me years, and I had to process it and look at it from different angles. But part of what helped me there was to understand, first of all, the Ascended Masters are not like the fallen beings. What's the goal of the fallen beings? It is to put us down, to hammer us down in such a way that we feel like we've done something so terrible we could never be redeemed. But the whole idea of Christ is the Redeemer. There's nothing that can't be redeemed when you give it up. No matter what, the Master has said this so many times, there's nothing you can do with your free will that you can't overcome by making a more aware choice. Whatever you may have done, even if you're a fallen being, nothing from your past that you can't transcend through the Christ light. But you have to be willing to give it up, the self that caused you to do what you did and that you might still be carrying with you. And in order to give it up, of course, you have to look at it. So therefore, when there's something you're not willing to look at because you think you would condemn yourself, you're in a catch-22. And what broke it for me was realizing this. The Masters do not condemn me as the fallen beings do. They are the ones who want to put me there where I feel like I can't rise above it. But the Ascended Masters don't. They only want me to rise. So no matter what I might have done, they are willing to help me grow. The other thing I realize is that the Masters love us unconditionally. And this was because I actually experienced the unconditional love of the Masters several times. And I have met people who have been on the spiritual path for many years. There was a person I knew once who really sincerely disputed that God's love is unconditional. Because she could not let go of this idea of the angry, judgmental God in the sky. That we could do something so terrible that God would condemn us for all eternity. And I can only attribute that to the fact that she hadn't experienced unconditional love. But why? Why hadn't she experienced it? Because what I experienced is, this is like the gentle rain from heaven that rains upon the just and the unjust, right? So there's constantly a rain of unconditional love coming down from the spiritual realm. And why hadn't she experienced it? Because she wasn't willing to open her mind to it, her heart. Why? Because she was judging that God is judgmental and therefore There are certain things that we can do that are wrong. And incidentally, that meant that she also had this in her idea that other people could do something they were wrong, and she could determine whether they had done something wrong, and therefore feel that she was justified in condemning them, judging them. So when you're not willing to give that up, which is part of the ego's sense of superiority, because why do you want to judge other people? Because it reinforces the sense that you're superior to them because you can judge them. You know they've done something wrong. So I'm just trying to point out some of these catch-22s that we can put ourselves in, where we can't open our minds to experience the unconditional love of the Ascended Masters. But it's really only when we experience that love that we can come to a point where we say, I'm willing to show me anything I haven't seen. Because you're no longer afraid that if the Masters see something in you that you haven't seen, they're going to condemn you. Now, of course, it's completely illogical to think that you can hide anything from the Masters. And maybe this is another element we can talk about, because when I look back, as I said, I had this period where I was asking the Masters to show me something, but had these safe zones where I didn't want to see anything. And really, what is that based on? It's based on the primary illusion of the ego, that it can hide something from the Ascended Masters. The ego literally thinks that it can hide something from the Masters, and what it can hide behind a facade so that other people don't see it, well, then the Masters don't see it either, right? That's what the ego thinks. And I came to a point where I saw this, I confronted this, and I said, oh, this is just flat out ridiculous. How could I possibly hide something from the Ascended Masters who in the spiritual realm and see everything? I mean, yeah, in the physical realm there are barriers. You know, if I hold up this, I can't see the camera now, physically. But of course, for Ascended Masters, there are no such barriers. They're like Superman who can see through walls, the walls of the ego. So I came to that point where I said, okay, so that actually means that even though there may be an element of my ego that I haven't seen because I'm afraid I would condemn myself if I saw it, the Ascended Masters have already seen it. And if they're still willing to work with me, even though they see this that I don't see, well, it must mean it isn't so bad that they are going to reject me. So that means that if I see it, I don't need to be afraid that the Masters are going to reject me. And in fact, if I don't see it, I'm going to be stuck in it indefinitely. The only way to overcome it is to see it. So let's take a look. So anyway, so getting back to this idea at the 96 level, you know, as I said, you're growing from the 48 to the 96, you're building the spiritual self. And it's very easy to come to see, and I've seen this both in myself, but especially in some people. I met many people on the spiritual path who actually, let me try and explain that a different way. When I look back at the many spiritual students I met, I can see you can roughly put them into two categories. There are the ones who have a certain insecurity, and they're willing to acknowledge that they're insecure. They don't know everything, so they're willing to look at themselves. And it's not necessarily that this is only a good thing, because many people, myself included, we are often too willing to look at ourselves and put ourselves down. I have met people, for example, who, whenever they talk about themselves, they always have to put themselves down. Oh yeah, but I'm not really, and I had this problem and that problem and this and that. And so this can also be taken too far. But there are people, but at least these people are open to the possibility that they don't know everything. Then there's another group of people who, at least from an outer standpoint, they appear to be absolutely sure of themselves. They are behaving, they come into a room, they are behaving like everybody should now turn around and look at me because here's the most important person in the room. I have an understanding of Ascended Master teachings. I know what is the right way to interpret the teachings. And these are especially the kind of people that you see in spiritual organizations who want power. And when they get a sense of power, they act as if they are infallible, and they expect blind obedience from those who are below them. And they could never do anything wrong, and they will never admit if they've done anything wrong. So I look back at my time in spiritual movements and see this, both in TM, where at some point, there was a funny situation that I think is worth mentioning. In Denmark, the TM movement had been built up over a number of years by a relatively small group of these meditation teachers that had really put their heart and soul into it. And they had now grown, and they had families, and they had children, so they had obligations to fulfill. Then the TM movement comes out with this new 6 months meditation course, a governor training course. You became a governor of the Age of Enlightenment. And these older meditation teachers who had some maturity and had experience with building up the movement, they couldn't afford to take these because they had kids and mortgages and this and that. But there was now a group of young, especially men, who were willing to put everything aside or do whatever was needed to be able to afford these courses. So here these young people don't really have much experience in running a movement, for that matter, not much experience in dealing with other people. They go and take these courses. Now they come home. They are governors of the Age of Enlightenment. And then the TM movement made a very profound mistake. They put these governors in charge of the organization in Denmark. So here you have an organization built by all these experienced people. And now they have to obey these inexperienced people who often didn't have people skills whatsoever, just because they had a title. And it basically caused a lot of upheaval and conflict, but it basically caused the older teachers just to fade away, and the organization was left to these young people and the membership dropped because they didn't know how to deal with people. And you see the same in many spiritual organizations where an organization grows, and now all of a sudden you need to have some leaders who can make things function, but they think that because they have a leadership position, now they're above everybody else, and they're infallible, and they demand blind obedience. And that means they're not willing to correct if they made a mistake. So this locks an organization on a track that it can't get off. And often people feel they're not treated well, and they leave. So you see many organizations that go through this growth cycle and then deterioration cycle. Anyway, that was a detour. But what I wanted to illustrate with this is that you have the two groups of people who have some insecurity and people who have, at least on the outer, a sense of security, and they portray this security. They may, of course, have a deep inner insecurity, they always do, that they're covering it over. But the problem is that by covering over this insecurity and projecting even in your own mind that you know everything, you're not open. You're not open to inner direction. You saw this in the summit where you had actually El Moya, who sponsored the Summit Lighthouse. His motto was, if the guru be an ant, heed him. In other words, you are always looking for some impulse that can help you see something in yourself or see something you haven't seen. So basically, any person you meet could be a guru, not permanently and all the time, but that person could tell you something, one thing that you need to hear that would help you grow. So El Moya was saying, always be on the lookout for the guru in the disguise of an ant. But once you go into this state of mind, of feeling you have it all figured out and you're infallible, you're not open to the guru as an ant. So you had in some lighthouse for example, you had people that were they were in leadership positions, and they basically felt that most other people in the organization, they were below them. So when somebody came and said, you know, this is happening and it has this consequence that harms people, they were not willing to listen to it. They thought they knew best, so they didn't need to change. And some of these people, I think, were probably willing to listen to Elizabeth Clare Prophet. But I noticed also that many of these people, they tried to stay out of her way. They tried to stay below her radar so that she never looked at him. So in other words, it's like they put themselves in this no guru land where there was no guru as an ant that could come from below, and they avoided the guru from above. So they could maintain this idea that they basically had it all figured out and they were infallible. And this is what can happen to people as they approach that 96 level. Because, first of all, you're increasing your outer knowledge. You're pulling yourself above the collective consciousness. You see that you understand a lot more than most people in the world, and even maybe many people on the spiritual path who are at lower levels. Of course, if you are at the 95th level, you understand more than a person at the 60th level. So, what I'm saying is that there are people who think, they literally believe, that the key to growth, the key to the ascension, is to perfect this spiritual self that they have built. But as the Masters have explained, which I think is an exceptionally profound teaching, this self is only meant to take you to the 96th level. And after that, you need to start dismantling it, because you can't ascend with it. It is not this spiritual self, no matter how sophisticated it is, that's going to ascend. And that's why, again, the teaching on the conscious you is so profound. It goes back to Jesus, who said to Nicodemus, only the man who descended from heaven can ascend back to heaven. Who is the man that descended from heaven? The conscious you. It's pure awareness. It's not the outer personality, but neither is it this spiritual self that you built from the 48th to the 96th level. So how are you going to ascend at 144th level? So you have 48 levels to build the spiritual self, and now you have 48 levels from the 96th to the 144th to break it down, so that you return to that state that you descended with as the conscious you, as pure awareness. It's not this outer self that's going to ascend. And so, I think what I really was aiming to get to is this, that I came to a point, it again was a process, different realizations, insights that shifted me a little bit, but I came to a point where I broke through and realized that my outer mind doesn't know anything that's valid, that's valuable. My outer mind can't know. It actually can't know what is the spiritual reality. Why? Because the outer mind is, the analytical mind, the linear mind, the intellectual mind, the reasoning mind, the rational mind. It's all of this, has all these faculties that are valuable enough for dealing with life. But when it comes to knowing about the spiritual reality, there's only one way to know, and that's through the Christ mind. And the Christ mind is not my outer mind. And in the summit, it was actually talked about that you become the Christ, you become the living Christ. And I think the way most people saw this, certainly the way I saw it at a certain time, is that your soul becomes the Christ. Your mind becomes so sophisticated that it becomes the Christ. But what I realized was that's a complete and actually fatal misunderstanding. You become the Christ by returning to that state of pure awareness where you realize, as Jesus said, I can of my own self do nothing. The Father within me doeth the work, the I am presence, the Christ mind. So, don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying I'm not saying the outer mind fades away. I'm not saying you end up not knowing anything. Because when it comes to the practical aspects of life, and perhaps this is a good contradiction to clarify here, what is it that's happening as we are walking the spiritual path? Well, we are acquiring knowledge and understanding of how the world works, how the spiritual path works, how psychology works, and all of this and that. And it's not that this knowledge drops away and we end up being basically happy idiots. That's not what I'm talking about. But what I'm talking about is that in order to pass the initiation at the 96th level, you actually have to realize that all of this outer knowledge will not get you into heaven. It will not get you to the Christ consciousness. Because this is all worldly knowledge. And as long as we're in embodiment, it's of course valuable. But What's really going to get us into the spiritual realm is only the Christ consciousness. And how do we contact the Christ consciousness? Only by transcending the outer knowledge. Only by transcending the spiritual self that thinks it knows something. And again, this requires a little bit, because am I saying that you need to transcend the self that knows that 2 + 2 = 4? No. But you see, here, what did I say if we reach back? You go into separation. You create the ego. The ego thinks it can define how the world works. It can define what's real and unreal. You will become as a god, knowing good and evil. And even the spiritual self we build up to the 96th level believes this, based on a spiritual teaching, not necessarily based on its own mind, but it takes the outer teaching. The spiritual self takes the outer teaching and uses that to justify that it knows something. And it does. It knows all of these practical things. But what I'm saying is, at the 96th level, you need to recognize that everything you know in this world is not going to get you closer to heaven, to the ascended state. Only the Christ mind. And the Christ mind is beyond anything in this world. That's why you have a situation with Peter, who tells Jesus, no, you're not going to be crucified. And Jesus tells him, get thee behind me, Satan. And as the Masters have explained, that's because Peter recognized that there was something special about the Christ in Jesus, but now he wanted to pull the Christ down and validate Peter's worldview. And that's what even the spiritual self wants to do, even up to the 96th level. And until you see this, you can't really pass that initiation there. So, gosh, I know this went way beyond what I thought originally, but what I'm getting at here is that there comes a certain turning point on the path where you could say you need to realize that it's not a matter of reinforcing the spiritual self that took you to the 96th level so that it becomes even more sophisticated at the 144th level. No, it's a matter of dismantling it. But what it really is a matter of is overcoming the sense that you can tell the difference between what is of the Christ and what is not of the Christ. That you are the Christ. No, the universal Christ mind is the Christ. You don't become it. You don't pull it down into your mind and now your mind is the Christ. You become the open door for it, but you always realize it's more than you. It's something that's streaming through you. You're not becoming the Christ in the sense that you're pulling the Christ down here and now your lower form is the Christ. You're becoming the open door, but you realize it's always something that's streaming through you. I can of my own self do nothing. And until you realize that, you can't really fully open yourself to the Christ mind and the Ascended Masters to show you the things in your psychology that you haven't seen. Now obviously you see certain things in your psychology in order to climb from the 48th to the 96th level. That's what the whole course of self-mastery is about, where the Johans take you through these levels. But there are still things you don't see at the 96th level. And in order to come to see that, it's not outer knowledge that will show you this. It's only inner knowledge, where from the Christ mind through an Ascended Master or your I Am Presence, you get an intuitive insight from within that shows you this. And the reason why this is important is that an outer teaching is always given in words, and words can be interpreted. And words can give rise to different mental images. So a certain mental image of what it means to be the Christ, for example. And this means your ego, the remnants of your ego you have left, it can hide behind this mental image, this interpretation of words. Because you can deflect, you can say, oh yeah, I understand how this aspect of the ego works, and I see that this person and that person, oh yeah, obviously they have this ego. but you can't see it in yourself. You can't see how it's disguised itself in your mind. And the only way to get to see this is you get something from within that is not an outer teaching that can be interpreted. Your ego can't hide behind it. Because when you get an impulse from within, it's not words. It can sometimes be words, but it's more than words. It's really an epiphany, a revelation, aha experience. You see it, you experience it with the totality of your being. And the ego can't hide behind it. And so, what did I say? There are people who have been on the path, who've done all the outer things right, but they haven't gained the progress they could gain. And the reason is they haven't resolved their personal psychology at the deeper levels. And the reason for this is they haven't seen it. And they haven't seen it because they haven't been open to the Ascended Masters showing them this, what it means for them personally. They might see it theoretically and see it in other people, but they're not seeing it in themselves. It's like you can say they have the teaching, but they haven't applied it to themselves. That's what I see over and over and over again. Again, I can see it in myself, how there were certain teachings I couldn't apply to myself for a long period of time. What I'm saying is that there are people who haven't understood that this is what you need to do at a certain level of the path. And therefore, they can't get beyond that level. They're kind of standing there. They have the outer teaching. They understand it intellectually. They can quote it verbatim. They can tell other people. No, one of the most common things you see is actually that there's a person who has been on the path, and no doubt that person has attained a certain understanding of the path, probably also certain growth and resolution of psychology. But now they begin to think, for example, they reached a certain level of Christhood. And now it's their role to go out and help other people and make other people see what they can't see, or even challenge people because they see that this person is suffering from illusion. I need to challenge them. And so all of a sudden they go into this projecting out how other people should apply the teaching. And that means that whatever level they are at when they do this, they can't grow beyond it because now they are no longer looking at themselves. And what I'm trying to say is you can't allow yourself to get in that state of mind. Because the moment you do, you start going backwards. I mean, first of all, if you are in that state of mind, when you reach the 96 level, you can't go beyond it. But I think even if you go a little bit beyond the 96 level, I don't know. I think so. Maybe you can start going downhill again. But certainly you can come to that point below the 96 level where you feel now you reach some level of Christhood, and now you can see how other people should change, and now you're the one who needs to challenge other people and tell them what they can't see. I saw this in the summit. It was actually an old friend of mine that I knew who called it the mini guru syndrome. And now people set themselves up as gurus who can tell other people. And there was even stories of how some people would go around saying, I have a message from El Moya about your psychology. Or they were telling other people something. They would say, this is not me telling you this. This is El Moya telling you this. As if they were now the mouthpiece of El Moya. And all I'm trying to say with this is, when you go into this state of mind, you're not growing. Why? Because you're not looking at yourself. You're not asking the master, show me what I haven't seen. Show me how this teaching applies to me personally. And I understand, because I've seen this so many times, that the ego will resist this. These people I'm talking about, they're probably the last people who are going to be willing to listen to what I'm saying and take what I'm saying and apply it to themselves. Because once you go into this state of mind, people become unreachable. It's like I say, there's no teacher below them. The ant can't teach them anything, but they're trying to hide from the teacher above. So we're really in a catch-22 in a no man's land. But anyway, what I will say about this is that this state of mind, where people, even though they feel superior, there's an enormous tension in that state of mind, because you're constantly feeling that your aura of infallibility is threatened, and you have to constantly seek to maintain it. And it's a 24-hour job, and it's really, really a mental strain. and emotional strain. And so once you see it, once you give it up, gosh, it's the biggest relief you're ever going to feel. The biggest relief. I mean, I came to a point where as I said, I saw this, I saw how illogical it was. I was trying to hide from the masters. And it was such a relief to give it up. I mean, gosh. I mean, it's like, you could look at it this way, that you have a circle, and this is your mental faculties, your mental energy, right? This is the totality of your awareness, your conscious awareness. And so you have everything is driven by energy. So I have a certain amount of energy that's coming from your I am presence. And so the question is, what are you using that energy to in the circle of your awareness? And obviously, you want to get to a point where there's a relatively small amount of your energy that's going towards the world and physical life. And there's a relatively small percentage of energy and attention that's going towards upholding your ego and your facade and your sense that you're infallible. Right? So you really want to look at this and say, how much of this is tied up in things that take away my inner peace and give me stress? And when you are in this state that you think you have to uphold this infallibility, I would say that the majority of your life and attention is just eaten up by maintaining this image. And once you let that go and you free that up, gosh, you're just going to feel so much more peaceful. So anyway, I don't think there's anything more that wants to be said here. But yeah, one more thing. As I said, there are two kinds of people on the spiritual path. Those who are insecure and willing to look at themselves, and those who project an aura of security and who are not willing to look at themselves. And really the enigma on the spiritual path is, how can you possibly help those who have closed their minds because they think they're superior, they think they have it all figured out, they think they know better than anybody else. They know better than other students, and they even know better than the ascended masters, if it comes down to it. They won't admit this consciously, but that is the essence of what they're saying subconsciously. They know better than the masters because they don't need to ask the masters for help and be open. So how can you help those? And really, if you figure it out, please let me know. Because I've been on spiritual path for 48 years. I've been dealing with these people. My father was just like that. So I was dealing with him during my whole childhood. I haven't figured out how to help these people. I honestly haven't. And I have, though, seen some people who got over it. And it's because, in some cases, it's because the school of hard knocks gave them such hard knocks that they couldn't maintain the facade anymore. And they were willing to look at themselves. In other cases, it was because they came to a certain insight. So they were a little bit open. They were still projecting this facade, but they were still open to seeing some things. But I have also met people who have been in this state of mind for a very long time, for decades, and they haven't changed. And I'm not sure that there's anything that anybody could say to them that would help them. But as I said, it could also just be because I haven't figured it out yet. But it could also be that those people who think they have figured it out, they are in exactly that state of mind where they think they know everything. So I don't know. I just thought I wanted to put this out there because maybe it can help somebody.